Welcome to CBS Easy.
All right, hello and welcome. Today we are diving into two incredible pieces of literature that tackle some of the biggest questions we can ask. We're going to unpack Buddha's famous sermon at Benares and then jump into the poem For Anne Gregory. We're talking about loss, love, and what it all means. So let's get right into it.
So, to kick things off, I want you to think about this question. It's a heavy one, I know. What do you think is worse? This is the very idea that connects the two texts we're looking at today. One confronts the pain of death head-on, while the other gets into our deepest wish to be loved for who we truly are, no strings attached.
Okay, so let's start with part one and our first text, the sermon at Benares. Now, to really get what this sermon is all about, you've got to understand the man who gave it. His journey is pretty incredible, from a life of luxury to becoming one of the most important spiritual figures in history.
So, meet Siddhartha Gautama. He starts out as a prince, living in a bubble, completely protected from any kind of suffering. But then, when he's 25, that bubble just pops. He sees a sick man, an old man, a dead body, and a peaceful monk. These sights completely shake him, and he realizes he can't just sit in his palace anymore. He leaves everything behind to figure out why there's so much sorrow in the world. After 7 long years of searching, he finally sits under a tree, finds enlightenment, and becomes the Buddha, which literally means the enlightened one.
And that brings us right here, to this moment, his very first sermon, which he gave in the holy city of Benares. This thing is legendary. And it's legendary because it gets right to the heart of one of the toughest, most universal kinds of suffering there is, grief.
Now, the Buddha didn't just stand up and give a dry lecture. Nope. To really make his point about grief sink in, he used a powerful story, a story about a grieving mother named Kisa Gotami. And this example, it just perfectly captures his whole teaching.
Just try to imagine this scene for a second. It's absolutely heartbreaking. Kisa Gotami's only son has just died, and she is so lost in her grief, so deep in denial that she's carrying his body around to all her neighbors, begging them for some kind of medicine that can bring him back. I mean, her neighbors think she's completely lost her mind. She just can't accept what's happened.
So she ends up at the Buddha's feet, and he gives her this really strange prescription. He says, "Okay, I can help you, but there's a catch." He tells her to bring him a handful of mustard seeds, but they have to come from a house where no one has ever died. Not a child, not a parent, not a friend. Nobody. So she gets her hopes up and starts searching, going from door to door. But everywhere she goes, she finds that every single family has known loss. You see, the Buddhist task wasn't really about the seeds at all. It was about leading her to a huge realization all on her own.
This is what the people tell her. The living are few, but the dead are many. This quote is the real turning point. It's the moment Kisa Gotami's own personal, isolating grief smashes right into the massive shared grief of all people. She finally understands that her pain, as terrible as it is, isn't unique to her.
And this realization leads us to the absolute core of the sermon. This is the stuff that's a guaranteed 3-mark question, so listen up. The Buddha teaches that our lives are short and, full of trouble and pain. He says we're like ripe fruits, eventually going to fall, or like clay pots, made to one day break. Death is just a law of nature, and it doesn't care if you're young or old, wise or a fool. No one can save their loved ones from it.
So what's the solution? Well, it all boils down to this key takeaway. According to the Buddha, being wise isn't about somehow avoiding pain. It's about knowing the terms of the world. Basically, understanding and accepting how things really are. And a huge part of that is accepting the reality of death. The Buddha's logic is pretty straightforward here. He argues that weeping and endless grieving don't do any good. They don't bring back the person you've lost, and they certainly don't bring you peace. All they do is cause more pain and suffering for you, the person who's still living. To find peace, you have to pull out what he calls the arrow of lamentation. That's the wound of sorrow we inflict on ourselves, and the only way to do that is through acceptance. Okay, so the Buddha just challenged our whole idea about controlling life and death. Now, our next text is going to challenge another really deep human desire, the search for perfect love. We're shifting gears to the poem For Anne Gregory, and it asks a tough question. Can anyone ever love us for our true selves, or is it always about what's on the outside?
The poem is basically a conversation, but it's a huge debate. In one corner, you have the speaker who says that young men are just totally captivated by Anne's looks, especially her beautiful honey-colored yellow hair. But in the other corner, you've got Anne, and she's pushing back, hard. She says, so what? It's just hair. I could dye it brown or black or even carrot orange. She's trying to find a way to test people, to find someone who will love her, for myself alone, and not my yellow hair.
And then the poem hits us with this final, kind of devastating conclusion. The speaker says he once heard a holy man claim that only God is capable of that kind of perfect, unconditional love, of loving someone for their soul alone. For us regular humans, it seems, looks are a barrier we just can't get past.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground. So how about a quick pop quiz? Let's do a little quick fire round to see what's really sticking. Ready?
First up, what was that impossible task the Buddha gave to Kisa Gotami? And the correct answer is C. Find a mustard seed from a house that has never known death. Of course, it was impossible, but it was the perfect way to teach her that loss is a universal human experience.
All right, next question. In for Anne Gregory, what is Anne trying to prove by talking about dyeing her hair? The answer here is B. She wants to prove that love can go deeper than physical appearance. It's her ultimate test for finding someone who loves her for her and not just her pretty hair.
Awesome job. Okay, let's wrap this all up. Let's crystallize the most important high-yield points from both of these texts. If you're going to remember anything, remember this.
So, here are the top takeaways. From the sermon at Benares, the big idea is that death happens to everyone, and true wisdom is accepting that fact. Then, for Anne Gregory, shows us that classic conflict between inner and outer beauty, and it kind of suggests that true unconditional love might be something only God can do, not people. You see how both texts, in their own way, are pushing us to look beyond the surface to find a deeper truth?
And that leaves us with one last thing to chew on. Both of these works are about shattering our illusions, right? The illusion that we can control death, and maybe the illusion that perfect human love exists. So which do you think is the bigger, tougher illusion for us to let go of? It's a great question to think about. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.
Thank you for watching with us. See you next time.